Well, good afternoon and hello, everyone. Welcome to the Executive Leadership's Council's LinkedIn Live. We are so happy that you are here to celebrate Black Business Month with us. And we are also thrilled to have Alexis Newton, ELC member, author, fine artist, board director, joining us as well. My name is Rochelle Ritchie. I'm serving as your guest moderator today. And so we're going to get started into this discussion. Kim, thank you so much for being here. First, I want to start with just giving you a chance to introduce yourself to our audience.
I just want to say thank you so much to my ELC family for having me here. Just as an ELC member, to my brothers and sisters in ELC and anyone else listening, it's an honor to be here. Looking forward to the discussion, Rochelle. I always set my intention when I am, get a chance to talk to other folks. And, I've done a lot of things, and we'll talk about that and how I consider myself hyphenate, because I do a lot of different things, but I consider myself a dream defender, and I defend my dreams every day. And I'm all about people and organizations meeting their full potential. And I use my creativity as well as my corporate experience to bring all of that to life. So Black business is very important to the economic development of our community, and just thrilled to be here.
Absolutely. Now, you spent 20 years. You've had a very successful career in the corporate world. Was being a corporate executive a personal goal early on for you?
It was. My dad was in corporate America. He worked for IBM for 30 years. And so I was exposed to corporate America pretty young in my life. And I knew I wanted to go into business pretty early. I decided to go to college. I went to Fisk University and major in accounting. And I interned in accounting. And I tell people all the time, the thing I learned is I didn't want to work a single day in accounting. So I love internships for that reason. It teach you a lot about what you love and what you like. But I did learn a lot about myself. I explored other parts of business. So I went straight through and got my MBA in marketing because I have a huge creativity side of me, also just the curiosity and consumers and products. And so I had a full career in product management and strategy. So yes, it was a personal goal. And I think if you're an executive in corporate America and you're Black, you have to be intentional. Those kinds of things don't just happen. So yes, I mapped out my career and had all these expectations about what was going to get done.
Now, how would you describe your experience in the corporate world as a Black person, as a Black woman?
Mm-hmm. So I had a wonderful career at Hallmark. I was there. We were joking before we started. I always wanted to integrate art and business. So I wanted to start my career at Hallmark, but I thought I'd be there for just 2 years. And I ended up being there 23 years, a great career. I describe it in 3 chapters. My first 10 years, I was all things marketing. So that's chapter 1. I was a functional leader, and I did all kinds of marketing, product marketing, retail marketing, as well as advertising and promotional marketing. So multicultural marketing, I did it all. The second chapter, I call my cross-functional leader chapter. That's when I started working with leaders all across the company. I was a part of leading my first transformation. I led probably 3 transformations when I was there. One was focused on process, where we changed about 80% of the processes at the company. There was another one where took hundreds of millions of dollars, so a cost transformation. And the most recent one that I led was a consumer experience transformation. But my cross-functional leadership timeframe, I was able to see the business end to end because we were changing the way the company works. And so I was one of 5 leaders to lead that. And that's when I started to fall in love with the end-to-end view of the company. And I spent half my time learning how the company should work, and the other half of my time trying to make sure that it was working that way. That was a great chunk of experience, and it was when I also led a $1 billion product P&L for the company, so was able to run a business within the company. And my last chapter, I call my enterprise leader, and that's when I led strategy for the largest business unit. but I also led all the leadership team meetings. So I was like a chief of staff. That graduated into corporate strategy and then
Mhm.
ultimately consumer experience for anything that was branded. If I were to back up and say as a Black woman what that looks
Yeah.
like, it looks like being overprepared. It looks like, um,
Mhm.
creating a safe space for all of the other Black folks that I was leading through the process. It also meant making sure I was fortifying myself, and ELC has been a huge part of that. But I just remember talking to peers about how they got their promotions and how they got their sponsors. And someone always kind of picked them. They would tell these stories about, oh, they just saw something in me. No, I had to ask. I had to
Mhm.
overdevelop. I had to get in there and deliver. So it was hard work.
What was that pivotal moment, that aha moment, that had an impact on your journey? Because we're going to get into a little bit about, centered around the theme of this discussion, which is really focusing on pausing for a moment and fulfilling your life personally and within your career. What was that moment for you that made you have that sort of change of heart?
Mhm. So I think one of the reasons I'm sitting here is because I have changed my life pretty significantly, from the corporate world. And I would say the aha moment for me, there were several moments. I'll tell you about two. One was about 20 years into my career. I felt like I wasn't meeting my own potential. And I
Mhm.
remember dear Ann Fudge, our Ann Fudge, who, when I was going to grad school, looked up in corporate world and saw Ann Fudge running companies, et cetera. I really found her inspirational. And I remember her saying, sometimes we walk around these shoes that are really uncomfortable. We would never walk around in shoes that are uncomfortable, but somehow we walk
Mhm.
around these hallways in corporate America that don't quite feel right. But at 20 years, really nothing was wrong. I just didn't feel like I was meeting my potential. So I did three things very specifically. I exploded my network. That was about the time that I joined ELC and I joined some other, um, networking opportunities. And then I started to embrace what I loved more and do the things I was passionate about. We'll talk about the fact that I'm a quilter, so been
Mhm.
quilting a long time. So I embraced that more. And then I sought out experiences that would help me think about my life differently and people who would help me think about my life differently. And so I joined a fellowship. It's called the Henry Crown Fellowship. It's a fantastic experience, but and you have to be nominated. And the number one criteria, Rochelle, was to have an inflection point. Why were you willing to think about, looking at your life differently? And I was
Mhm.
lucky enough to be one of the 20 people chosen for my class, which was amazing and a wonderful experience. But it was the question for me. And I came
Mhm.
up with, I wanted to disrupt myself. And being a part of transformations, I was like, what, I need to do that myself. But the
Mhm.
irony was I didn't disrupt myself. Actually, at about 23 years in, I had remember having this conversation with God on vacation, and I said, God, there's all these other things I want to do, but there's opportunities for me also still in corporate. What should I do? Send me a sign. Don't send me a sign. I'm terrible with signs. Make it painfully clear what you want me to do. And 2 weeks later, my CEO stepped away, and a new CEO came in, and it was an opportune time for me to leave. And so I kind of got disrupted myself. But I was sitting there thinking, you know, look at God, look at God.
Mhm. Ask and you shall
Yeah,
receive, right?
yeah. I always tell people, don't pray for clarity unless you're ready. Unless you are ready. But that really wasn't. That was one aha moment. The other one was I could have run right back to corporate America. And that would have probably been the easy thing to do. I had offers to do so, but I decided to take off 6 months and started to think about not just what I should do, and this hits directly into the intentional pause,
Mhm.
but what I could do. And when you have time and treasure and talent, like so many people do, you have options, right? And so I wanted to step back and think about what could I do instead of just running back to corporate America. So
Yeah.
to me, the choice wasn't to leave Hallmark. The choice was not to go back to corporate and to, take some time to pursue what I was interested in.
Well, Kim, you shared a lot with us. I'm sure people have questions, so I want to encourage people to make sure that they are putting their questions in the chat. We'll have a 15-minute Q&A after our conversation. One of the things is your new portfolio. I would say is you describing yourself as having a lifestyle mindset. What exactly does that mean?
Yeah, so I really pivoted, from having kind of one career, so to speak, to living what I call the portfolio lifestyle. And this kind of goes back to when you have time, talent, and treasure. There are a lot of things you could do. And so I wanted to create options for myself. So I sit on a corporate board. So that is absolutely, and I actually love the time that I spent in corporate America. And I really like helping organizations and brands and scale, transform, those kinds of things. So that was important to me. So having a tie to corporate America was very important. And so one lane of my portfolio is a corporate board member. I also help lead some leadership seminars for Netflix for a little bit. So that was also a tie to corporate for me. I sold my first piece of artwork after I left Hallmark. I'd been quilting for many, many years on the side, which we'll talk about. But
Mhm.
when I was thinking about what I wanted to do, I went on what I call a walkabout. I talked to 30 leaders that I admire. Some of those were ELC members. But one in particular, my friend and mentor and corporate crush, Mindy Grossman, who was leading WW at the time. I was talking to her and she said, "What are you doing with your time?" And I said, "Well, I'm deciding to have an art show because I'm an artist." And she's like, "You're an artist?" Well, what do you do? And I'm like, "I'm a quilter." She's like, "Kim, you don't look like a quilter." And I showed her one and she's like, "I have to buy this for Oprah for her birthday." And so my first quilt I sold to Mindy, who gifted it to Oprah. And so, I had to
Amazing.
like step back and really think about that. Like, so this new title
Mhm.
for me of artist, I've sold about 14 pieces since then. I'm an artist. That's another lane. I started this company where I manufacture and import quilts and manage a global supply chain for that. So that is my business. It's my passion. I love it. It's fantastic. Uh, and then I also wrote this book, The Intentional Pause, and that's what I
Yeah.
speak on. So I have all those things, and I manage them. I don't go all in on one. I'm multi hyphenate. I can do them. I've gone from one income to 5 different ways to be able to bring in income as well. So
That's wonderful. And did you ever one question I have is why quilts? And then did you ever think that it would turn into a seven-figure business?
yeah, so I mentioned that my grandmother. Or I mentioned I was a quilter, but my
Mhm.
grandmother taught me when I was 21. And I spent the summer with her when I was interning in DC. And I thought I was just spending time with her, but I actually fell in love with it. She taught me the traditional way, but soon after, I met this quilt artist who also worked in corporate. Her name was Kyra Hicks, and she taught me a more contemporary way. So my art quilts are images, and they have words on them. And I basically would quilt every so often, but I would lay down what I wanted to remember. So my quilts had words that were
Mhm.
inspiring to me that I didn't want to forget. And then people would offer to buy them, and I'd say no because they were like my kids. And I wrote them down for me, like I wanted to remember them. But I always had this idea that, and I think it was a girlfriend of mine who took one of the quilts I had made. She took it to Sarita Jakes, TD Jakes' wife. This was a very long time ago. And she
Mhm.
said, "I want 1,000 of these." And I said to myself, "I can't make 1,000 quilts, but I know how to manufacture 1,000 quilts." And I wrote this business plan. And then I got promoted and I had a baby and, like all these other things. And it never happened. So leaving corporate, that was the one thing I wanted to do. And so I launched Alexis gift quilts. I think quilts are magical. They are the kind of thing that you would pass down generation to generation. They tell stories. Have marked the path to freedom for Black folks, like they're storytelling opportunities. And I use those as ways to inspire people. And I always say, give a gift that will last beyond a lifetime. I have quilters on both sides of my family. I own quilts that belong to my great great grandmother. They're over 100 years old. They're my only physical connection to her. And I wanted to be able to provide a turnkey gift. I know a little something about gifts and, from Hallmark days, but I wanted to be able to provide that, in a turnkey way. So that's why my quilts ship immediately out of my distribution center, and people can give a quilt very quickly. It would cost, if you commission a quilt to give as a gift, it would cost anywhere between $900 and $1,000. So I wanted to be able to provide an access way. And no, I didn't know it was going to turn up so quickly. Of course, I had a goal to turn it up quickly, but I hit 1 million in about 9 months. And part of that is due to my tribe, which is, we're going to talk about some of the benefits of being in corporate, but my tribe really helped me. The head of the Links, I had gifted her one. I'm in the Links Incorporated, and she's like, Kim, I want you to do the 75th anniversary for the Links, do a special quilt. And I got on a Facebook Live, and we sold 750 quilts in one night.
Wow.
It was quite amazing.
Wow.
But that was great for me, and just the people responded to it. So I've shipped over 6,000 quilts. I'm about 2 years old now. So
wow, that's amazing. And how would you say your corporate experience is helping you as an entrepreneur? Because there may be people that are watching this now and they're thinking, I have a talent outside of what I do in my corporate office. But one, they may have the fear of branching out and doing something on their own, but also not understand that the tools that they're gaining in their corporation can actually help them in their entrepreneurship.
Absolutely. So I think that having corporate experience and becoming an entrepreneur is a blessing and a curse. It's both of those.
Yeah, it's not as easy as people think.
Yes. And, I think also that it depends. Like I decided to do something that I had in my career, right? So, and oftentimes you leave and you want to consult, you end up consulting. But I wanted to develop a product, and I am a product developer, and I want to tell stories, and I'm a marketer. So this thing came in very, very handy. And so from a professional development standpoint, I had a lot of tools that I could bring, just in terms of project management, supply chain understanding. As I mentioned, I shifted from just being a marketer to like an end-to-end leader. I used to always tell people, understand how the business works end to end, because I thought I was a good marketer until I learned that I didn't know much about what happened before me, what happened after me, because we can get into these silos. And so that is one of the downfalls, is that if you come in, really specialized, you're going to have to wear many hats. So right now you're looking at the head of customer service, head of supply chain management. I'm the one who's doing creative and product development. So, it is wearing a lot of hats. And I think that, when you're in corporate, you're pretty specialized. So that's a big piece of it. A benefit is you bring a lot of industry knowledge, you know how things should work. And you have a broad network. My first hire was my CFO, COO. He used to work for me at Hallmark and with me. So we had a working relationship. I knew what I needed, because I understood how businesses work. But, you have to get out of your comfort zone. I used to literally manage enterprise risk management for Hallmark. And so when you're in a corporate environment, you manage for stability and risk. And if you manage for stability and risk as an entrepreneur, that's not going to work, right? You have to take those opportunities to put yourself out there. And it's a big mind shift, for you. Mindset shift is what I was trying to say. As an entrepreneur, you've got to be, creative, thinking about different opportunities, business development. You're wearing a lot of hats instead of just being able to point and asking people to do things. Not that corporate's that easy. That really isn't that fair. But you know, there's a group to help you. There's no group over here
Yeah, it's just
where I
you.
am anyway. I'm still in the startup phase, but yes, yeah.
But you do have your tribe, which you mentioned was very, very important. I do want to move the conversation a little bit into the theme of this. So if you've been with us, the theme of the discussion is the power of taking a pause and finding the courage to embark on your own personal journey of fulfillment in your career and in your life. And Kim, you wrote a book about this, The Intentional Pause. You've done research about the need to pause. Tell us a little bit about your book and then also the project that you worked on.
Sure. So, you know, I have mentored lots of women and men throughout my career. And before I left corporate, I was seeing a trend. I was seeing people were always striving for the next goal, but there wasn't a lot of fulfillment. It was like creating this next goal to get after, being really busy and overwhelmed, getting that pinnacle, setting the next one, but really kind of complaining the whole time. You know, I always say overwhelmed but underwhelmed, and I thought it was fascinating, and I actually honestly was feeling it myself, as I mentioned. And so I decided, like I mentioned, I'm curious. I decided to do some research on it. So I actually did a study with 400 women, ambitious, self-proclaimed ambitious women, and I found out just that: ambitious, 91%. Overwhelmed, both personally and professionally, like 80%, 85%, 87% overwhelmed, personally and professionally, but only 36% were following their dreams. And I found that fascinating. That fellowship I mentioned, this was actually, you have to do a venture and a project, and this was my project. And the criteria was what would make the world a better place. And I felt like if more people were following their dreams, it would make the world a better place. So I found out, you know, the stats I was mentioning. So I went in for another round of research, and I found out that ambitious women, I did talk to women, and I've heard from so many men who are like, I love this feminine point of view, but by the way, it counts for us too.
Yeah,
So my
I'm
next
sure it does.
all inclusive. But you know, that permission to pause, by far, that was a huge opportunity. Is people felt like they could not take a pause. And I don't mean a spa day or a day for a golf vacation. We're very, very good at that. But the idea of disrupting yourself enough to sit still with what's going on in your heart and not just your head. I talk about, you know, doing what you could do versus what you should do. And oftentimes it takes a lot of time. It took me 2 or 3 months to figure out I really had emotional laryngitis, Rochelle. I wasn't even sure how I felt because I had created this person that could go work and handle anything, you know, instead of allowing myself to say, how do I really feel about that? And how do I really feel? And what do I want to do? So permission to pause is huge. And then tools to help them navigate. What is it that I really want? You know, I know in my ELC family, but also so many other folks I talk to, there are a lot of, you know, dreams within people, and there's a lot of things that they could do, but what is it that I really want? You know, and it's great to hear people's stories, and it's great to, you know, read inspirational books, but I want tools. So that's why I created a workbook. That's the number one reason. And the last was strategies to fight fear. The number one reason why people were not pursuing what they wanted was fear. Fear of almost everything, fear of failure, fear of not having enough money, fear of, you know, like all the things. I take care of my family, all number of things. And so I was like, wow, how am I going to help people with fear? But those were the three big things that I saw coming out of the research, which is why I wrote The Intentional Pause. And it actually is a process. It's 5 steps. But the real key, and then I'll take a breath, the real key to it
Mhm.
is that, I help people build an emotional plan. So my corporate peeps will really understand this. When you're leading a transformation, you can have the most beautiful strategy, but if you don't have the right culture, nothing's going to get done. And so, why would that be any different personally? And so, oftentimes, we put together these master plans to do things we're scared of, and then we end up giving up. We end up giving
Yeah.
up. So, I wanted to help people with a give up, which is an emotional thing. It's an emotional thing. So the emotional plan is the culture plan. And, so I'll take a breath there and, we
No,
can
this is
continue.
No, this is great. I mean, I'm pretty sure that I am not alone when I say fear has really stopped me from doing some things. I'm sure other people in the audience are thinking the same thing. And when we're talking about fear, we have to look at some of the things that are happening in our country right now. If you look at DEI programs, they've been under attack over the last year, with really concerted efforts being made to eliminate them from corporate goals. And most recently, there's been an effort to eradicate venture capital that is dedicated to funding Black startups. And when you think about entrepreneurs and startups, that's a fear, right? Because you are really trying to start an app or start some sort of program, and you've got to get funding, and you have to feed yourself, and you have to pay the rent, and you have to take care of your children. But when you see these kind of things under attack, that it exacerbates the feeling of fear. What strategies did you use to secure your funding? And what advice would you
Mhm,
give to anyone who is trying
mhm.
to navigate those waters right now?
I definitely want to answer that. And then I want to loop back to the fear,
Hmm.
and how we talk about it. But, I think in this environment is very hostile against diverse effort. And it's really disheartening to see. And so, you know, I think this idea of, I don't know, I think that trying to pick my words, but
Carefully.
I carefully, um, but I do think that, our values are at risk right now, given everything that's happening. And I can only really speak to me personally that, I wrote my business plan actually 15 years before I did it. I'm not suggesting that people do that, but really, just like with anything else, we are trying to get it done. And I didn't want to have the obstacle of my financial, ability to start my business. So I saved. I did. I saved a really long time so I could have the option to do what I wanted to do. And then
Mhm.
I made sure that I was profitable in how I launched my business. I take pre orders, for example. I don't get heavied up on inventory. I do things that can de risk my personal exposure. And I chose not to go after venture funding yet. Obviously, there's still a lot more to
Mhm.
tell. But for me, I made sure that I could bootstrap. I always think about um, Tyler Perry saying, if there's no chair for me, I'm going to make sure that, or no table for me, I'm going to make sure I create my own. And I wanted to be able to be in charge of that. I also know that, when you are getting investors and things like that, they can have that time and energy putting into that can be a job of its own. And so I was really starting a lifestyle business, which is a little different than a tech startup. There
Mhm.
are lots of resources out there. And because your network is a really big piece of that. And there are people, Black folks, who are willing to invest in Black folks. But, we make a lot of mistakes, especially as women. Do bootstrap everything. We do try to do
Mhm.
everything ourselves. So I have very meticulously tried to think about when I add additional resources and talent, and being very, very intentional about making those choices. But it's very clear and disheartening about the the environment that we're in and how we're under attack from that perspective.
Yeah, and I want to give you a couple of seconds or minutes to talk about fear because you wanted to go back to that,
Mhm,
which I think is very
mhm,
important because when you talk about pausing, a lot of people are scared of just doing that. Even if they go on vacation, they're scared about not responding to a work email or not taking that work phone call when they're supposed to be pausing. So let's dive into that a little bit and then we're going to get
mhm.
to the questions from our audience.
Sure. So I just want to speak a little bit to the process and the initial pause, because you don't have to have the book to go through this process.
Mhm.
um, I actually joke all the time that I wrote the book that I needed, and I use my emotional plan daily. But the first step is to audit. I always said every strategy starts with the current assessment, and
Mhm.
so it's a life audit. Um, there are lots of life audits out there, but I wanted to make sure that we were auditing the emotional side. So I studied why people give up. It's for 5 reasons: fears, obstacles, relationships, emotions, and self talk. And as I was putting this together, I was like, oh my gosh, it says the word forest. So I call it your forest, your
Mhm.
obstacles, relationships, emotions, and self talk. And those are the reasons why people give up. And so I make sure that you audit. How do you react to fear? How do you react to having an obstacle? How do you maintain your relationships depending on what you're going through? And how are you with emotional decision making? We always know we're not
Mhm.
making the best decisions when we're emotional. And then where you are with your self-talk. So auditing is a big piece of it. And then, dreaming. When we get older, we tend to do again what we should do, what our head says, and not always what our heart thinks. Or so this muscle of dreaming. I have quite a few exercises that bring that up, but one is, what do you think you're uniquely positioned to do? I know I'm uniquely positioned to launch a quilt product gift company, right?
Mhm.
But what are you uniquely positioned to do? Because that can also help you reduce the fear factor. And then you have to have goals, of course, to be able to go after what you want. But the real differentiator is then I help you take your forest and build the emotional plan, the fears, think about the obstacles. Those
Mhm.
people who are around us every day who love us may not be the kind of people we need around us, just need around us, right? We might need people who've done it before, people who
Mhm.
can help break down barriers. And we don't always think about that. We always think about the power of our relationships, given what we're going through. So I opened up a whole new set of relationships when I decided to open my business, right? But I had to
Mhm.
maintain, a lot of, because they were very helpful to me as well. And how you manage your emotions and your self-talk. And one thing I'll say about emotions is I mentioned my emotional laryngitis. I don't think I even understood what the corporate environment was doing to me emotionally.
Mhm.
I know folks understand what I'm talking about until I got away from it. But
Mhm.
you want to make sure that you're showing up. My door always had to be open for other people, right? Um, Other Black folks, as well as that were in my operational network. And so I didn't have a lot of time for myself. And so how can I really know what I need if I don't know what I'm feeling? And I take a lot of time to think of what I needed at a very deep level. So I just bring up the forest just because it really is any transformation. And Rochelle, I was at an ELC meeting when I saw this during one
Mhm.
of we a family meeting. But it was a curve of transformation, and it talked about all of the different feelings that you have when you're going through a transition, right, or a transformation.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's an emotional journey. That's an emotional journey. And so I think we always attack those things with our head instead of really thinking about what is going to be the emotional things that I have to put in. What are the scaffolding I'm going to need emotionally to make sure that I don't give up on this?
That is such a really great strategy to prepare for the obstacles by acknowledging the negative emotions that are going to come as you pursue a dream or goal or leave your corporate company to become an entrepreneur. And I think that's something that we can apply to all aspects of our life outside of business. So Kim, Thank you for all of that. Now, I want to get to some of the questions. The audience has really loved this discussion with you. They loved hearing about your quilts. Let's read one of the questions. It says, I love this, so inspiring. Kim, as an aspiring entrepreneur, I'd love to know what are some difficulties or roadblocks you believe are unique to women of color on their journey as business owners throughout their entrepreneurship.
Yes. So, great question. I think there are some that are really tied to entrepreneurship, and then definitely we as Black women have tendencies. And one of those tendencies, so roadblocks would be things like making sure that we're maintaining cash flow. Cash is king when you are, an entrepreneur, and making sure that you're securing the right funding, having the right talent to be able to help you scale, especially when you're starting out, I think is hugely important. This is one of our tendencies. We tend to not get help, not ask for help,
Yeah.
and try to take on things ourselves. I am definitely guilty of that. It happens. I know how I want things. Again, back to the blessing and curse of corporate. I know how it's supposed to work, but I also know what I can afford, and I know the talent I can get. And so, I think the tendency to take on all of the hats and not ask for help is something for sure, that I would say be cognizant of. And then also, we tend to bootstrap things, instead of going and getting the proper resources in place ahead of time. And so, how else are you thinking about funding your business? We tend to talk to people that we know, instead of going and
Yeah.
finding the right talent to get this done. So when I wanted to launch this business, I tinkered away at trying to get it done through a sourcing agent, et cetera. And I was like, you know what? I know who's going to be able to understand this. I need an executive power that really understands what I'm trying to do. And through, reaching out and finding I found a perfect partner who not only understood what I was trying to do, taught me a ton of things, and then was my direct source to my manufacturer in India. So I don't have now the sourcing agent costs associated with my products because I was able to seek her out. But, you know, just talking to the designers, for example, that I knew at Hallmark that majored in paper, they didn't really understand. But Black women, we tend to talk to each other. We tend to talk to the people we know instead of really saying, let me go to the experts. Let me find the right resources for my business so I can do this properly. And that's,
So
those are,
definitely, yeah. So expanding your network outside of your comfort zone, really, it sounds like.
comfort zone and expertise, and just making sure that you are setting up the right set of resources, because talent and funds, those are huge, huge
Mhm.
pieces of being able to be successful.
Now, one
Yes.
question I see in the chat that I really want to ask, because you mentioned this earlier about how you saved. One of the questions from one of the audience members says, I would like to know what was her saving strategy to fund her business, and did she launch it before she quit her full-time job?
So I I just stopped spending on stuff until I got to a number that I felt comfortable with. it
Mhm.
wasn't it wasn't really rocket science from that perspective. And I do know a lot of folks who do get side hustles and things like that, to help them with that. But I literally just stopped spending on things that, I felt like I didn't need because I wanted this a little bit more. So I did squirrel away a little fund. And by the way, I think you should do that anyway, to make sure. And I'm not talking about the savings fund that's going to take care of you for the rest of your life. I'm talking about something that you can use on your from your passions, because I didn't want anybody tell me that I couldn't do this. That was a big piece to me. But no, I didn't start it on the side. This kind of goes back to focus. I I I could have tried, but I really made a conscious decision that this is what I want to do. This is when the fear sets in, right? I've got to have this corporate job. I've got to be able to do this. But I promise you, if you think about how all the different ways you can make money, it doesn't always have to be, what you think it is, from that perspective. And then I think, dreams, we're talking about dreams. Dreams don't always mean starting your own business, right? There's other dreams. So
Yeah.
maybe it is the promotion that you want. Maybe it is that you want to,
Mhm.
um, you know, be chief this or director of that. And you don't want to have to leave your company to do that. There are other opportunities. There are different ways to get things done. And sometimes you have to take those risks. But I waited until I could concentrate on it.
And I'm glad you mentioned that because there is this sort of push for everyone to become an entrepreneur, right? To quit your job and go start a business, but
I would
that's
not.
really not for everyone. So I'm glad
Yes.
I'm glad you mentioned that. And you did mention risk. So I want to get to a couple more questions. We have about maybe 5 minutes left in this discussion. The question is, how do you manage risk taking in your business endeavors, and how has your background influenced your approach to taking calculated risk?
It's a great question. Um, I think I knew what I wanted, what would make me feel comfortable in my business, for example. So starting to do special edition quilts where I partnered with organizations was a great way for me to grow my base. So I've done them for fraternities and
Mhm.
sororities, and I mentioned the Links and the Boulay and other groups that I've partnered with. But it was really important, so doing very large runs of quilts. I didn't want to sit on a lot of inventory, right? Because I want my cash to be able to do other things. So I made the choice to make sure that there was a pre-order item. So if people want it, they're going to have to wait for it because I don't want to be over inventoried. you know. So I did take the risk by partnering and scaling, but at the same time I did it on my terms, and there was definitely pressure from me inside. By the way, most of our pressure comes from the inside. uh, to make sure that I had everything in stock and then I was shipping immediately before. But that's what I want, but I had to be able
Mhm.
to take a risk to say what's right for my business and what's going to make me feel comfortable. And then I made a plan for that cash, so I give a percentage back to the organization for that partnership, for the
Mhm.
patients, for all those things. But to back up and answer the broad question, I take risks because I'm interested in growing. I have 3 or 4 more horizons in my business. I'm really trying to think through how do I prioritize? How do
Yeah.
I prioritize so I can still feel comfortable but grow and not miss out on opportunities? Because that's the challenge. When you stay safe, you miss.
Yeah. And staying safe is also I think important as well because people may have these really great ideas. And there's a question in the chat that I think is also another great question that we'll get to. How about two more questions after this? But this person said, how do you protect yourself or your ideas while searching for the right set of resources? Because you want to protect your intellectual property, right? You
Mhm,
want to
mhm.
protect your creative idea. And so when you're sharing this with a multitude of people, how do you make sure someone doesn't take that and steal it from you?
That's a really great question. For me, I majored in the experience because and the storytelling of why I am delivering these quilts. Putting words on anybody can do that, like anybody can do that. But how did I make sure that it's my that it's an experience that's unmatched, and that is
Mhm.
always going to have to elevate, right? Because as soon as it's out there, there's not much that's that people that you can do to I can copyright my designs, which I absolutely do, and I do have an intellectual and property lawyer.
Mhm.
And I do protect my ideas. I do trademark. I brand. All of those things are really important, and to create an experience. So I really think thinking through how you're going to differentiate is paramount if you're worried about it being stolen. Um, you have to think about how are you going to deliver that experience in a unique way. And this is also important. I probably could have launched my quilts on the side, but I didn't want to launch something that was half-hearted. I didn't want to launch something that wasn't a best representation of me.
Yeah.
And so finding the right talent, finding the right manufacturing partners, finding the right designers, all of that was knitted together before I launched, and it wasn't perfect, but it wasn't shenanigans on the side.
Yeah. Okay, well, let me get to this last question here. It says, "Hi Kim, I'm currently the chief of staff for a wealth tech organization. Among many things, I'm falling deeply in love with transforming the culture in my current organization. Hearing that your career was focused on transformations, what advice would you give regarding transforming a male-dominated field to an inclusive, innovative, healthy space?"
I think that's a great question, and it does start with culture, and usually culture
Mhm.
starts at the top. And so, making sure that what the work that you're doing and the values that you're creating are embraced at the top, I think is really important because you alone can't change a culture.
Mhm.
Culture, there's some studies that say, people have to see you show up seven times a different way before they believe you. And so, what are the proof points that you're trying to put in place that says, yes, this culture is different? And then make sure that those are big, visible opportunities. So, I know it is male dominated, and it sounds like you have some very specific things that you want that culture to align on, but you're not going to be able to do that yourself. You're going to have to get people in the boat with you, leadership in particular, because that's what people are going to believe is the
Mhm.
behavior that they see. So I
Right.
think culture change has to happen at the top. It is
Yeah.
very hard to get that done any other way.
Yeah. From the top down is how they usually say everything flows. Kim, I want to thank you so much for joining us for the ELC's LinkedIn live discussion. As again, we're celebrating Black Business Month. I want to thank our audience as well for joining us. And I hope you all gained a lot of insight into how you can not only pause, protect your creative ideas, but actually step into a life that supports your personal and professional goals with peace. So thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.